The automatic doors of the Norfolk Advanced Veterinary Emergency Center burst open, as though something on the other side had charged them at full speed. And then the waiting room understood exactly why. Chief Petty Officer Rhett Dolan came through first. 6'2", dressed in Navy working camouflage, his jaw set like poured concrete, and his eyes running the room the way a man sweeps a building before declaring it clear. He was maybe 36, 37, with the kind of weathered face that belonged to someone who had spent more nights outside the wire than inside a bunk. His right forearm was wrapped twice around a reinforced nylon lead, and every muscle along that forearm was standing at full attention. At the end of that lead was Wraith. The Belgian Malinois was 78 pounds of barely contained catastrophe. He wore a jet-black tactical harness stamped with the faded unit insignia of naval special warfare, and he wore a wire basket muzzle that did nothing to muffle the sound coming out of him, a low, rolling growl that felt less like a noise and more like a physical thing, like pressure building inside a sealed room. His amber eyes swept the reception area in rapid, desperate arcs. His right front leg barely touched the ground, and every single person in that waiting room took one look at him and took one unconscious step backward. "Clear the floor," Rhett said, "not a request. Now." Dr. Harris Bowen was already moving from the hallway. He was the senior veterinarian at the center, 23 years of practice behind him, and he had the unflappable calm of a man who had talked down more panicked animals than he could count. He stopped when he saw Wraith and reassessed. "Chief Dolan," Bowen said carefully, keeping his hands open and low. "What are we dealing with?" "Wraith, dual-purpose K9, attached to SEAL Team 8. Rhett's voice was clipped, the information delivered the way he would deliver a grid coordinate. "Returned from deployment in the Paktika province 11 days ago. Since then, he's been unmanageable." He bit a handler at the kennel. He put another one in the ER. Rhett's jaw tightened. "And 3 hours ago, he went after a base veterinarian who tried to take his blood pressure." Wraith's growl deepened as Bowen took one careful step closer. The Malinois swung his entire body sideways, putting himself between Rhett and the doctor, his muzzled teeth scraping against the wire with a sound like a key dragged across a locked door. "You get within 10 feet of this dog," Rhett said, not raising his voice, "and you won't have a hand left. Wire muzzle or not, he'll find a way." He wasn't warning them to be dramatic. He was stating a fact he had already watched play out twice in the last 2 days. Command's position is that he's a liability. The behavioral evaluation is at 1600 hours. If Dr. Bowen can't identify a treatable cause for the aggression, he's scheduled for euthanasia at 1800. The word landed in the room like a dropped instrument tray. Bowen absorbed it, nodded once, and reached for a pair of Kevlar-lined handling gloves. "I'll need to get closer to assess him. We have protocols." "Doc," Rhett looked at him steadily, "I've had my hand on this leash for 11 days. I haven't slept more than 90 minutes at a stretch. I know this dog better than I know myself. He is not going to let you touch him. Not with those gloves, not without them. The only way you're getting him on an exam table is with a sedation pole." "Then we'll use the pole," Bowen said. Last time someone tried a dart gun, Wraith nearly tore the room apart before it hit him. His adrenaline is already spiked. Rhett rubbed one hand over his face, the exhaustion breaking through the discipline for just a moment. "I don't want him going out like that. He deserves better than being hunted down in a waiting room." Bowen moved toward the dispensary cabinet, the shift in his posture, decisive, resolved, made Wraith's ears flatten to his skull. In the far corner of the reception area, next to the wall-mounted intake computer, stood Laurel Caine. She was 28 years old, slender in her slate-gray Rehab specialist scrubs, her dark hair pinned back in a practical twist. She had been at the Norfolk Center for 7 months, long enough to know the rhythms of the place, but still new enough that Dr. Bowen sometimes forgot she was in the room. She had not said a single word since Rhett and Wraith had come through the doors. She wasn't watching the dog's teeth. She wasn't watching his muzzle, or his eyes, or the aggressive forward pitch of his body. She was watching his right front leg. Every time Wraith shifted his weight, pivoting, lunging, spinning to check the room, he unloaded his right shoulder a fraction of a second before the movement completed. It was almost invisible, the kind of compensation a dog builds over days, unconsciously redistributing the load away from something that hurt. And when Rhett tugged the lead, tightening the nylon straps of the tactical harness across the dog's chest and shoulder, Wraith's aggression spiked immediately, every single time, within the same breath. Laurel had noticed it within 90 seconds of them walking in. She also noticed that nobody else had. "I'm going to draw the sedative," Baun announced from the dispensary. He did not look back toward the corner. "Caine, get behind the counter. This isn't a rehab case." Laurel did not move behind the counter. Instead, she walked forward. "Caine," Baun's voice sharpened. "His right shoulder," Laurel said. She kept her voice low and level. She kept her eyes off the dog entirely, fixed on a point on the linoleum about 3 feet in front of Wraith's paws. "He's unloading his right front leg every time he moves, and every time the harness gets pulled tight, his aggression escalates. He's not reacting to the people, Dr. Baun. He's reacting to the pain." Rhett turned to look at her. He took her in. The youth, the scrubs, the deliberate calm, and the look on his face was the particular brand of dismissal that people in his profession reserved for civilians who thought they understood things they didn't. "He had a full medical workup at the base," Rhett said. "X-rays, blood work, the whole thing. They didn't find any injury." "Did they take him out of his harness for the workup?" A pause, small but real. "No," Rhett said. His voice was even. "He wouldn't allow it." "Then they didn't examine his shoulder." Laurel took one slow step forward. She kept her palms down, fingers relaxed, nothing telegraphed. "X-rays are taken of the things you can see. If the harness never came off, nobody checked what the harness was hiding." Rhett's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "You're a rehab tech. You've been here, what, 6 months?" 7. "And you want me to let a 7-month vet tech walk up to a military working dog that put 2 handlers and a base veterinarian in the hospital? I want you to loosen the tension on the leash before Dr. Baun loads that syringe. Watch what happens to his aggression when there's no pressure on the harness straps." Baun came back from the dispensary. He had the sedation pole in hand. "Caine, I'm not going to ask again. If you sedate him while his adrenaline is this elevated, it'll be a rough road down," Laurel said. She wasn't looking at Baun either. She was still watching the dog. "He's already working his heart too hard. Please just give me 60 seconds. The room was very quiet. The fluorescent lights above the stainless steel reception desk hummed at a frequency nobody could quite name. Rhett looked at his dog. He looked at the girl. He looked at the sedation pole in Baun's hand. 60 seconds, Rhett said. Then the doc does what he needs to do. Baun's jaw tightened, but he held. Laurel walked forward until she was roughly 10 feet from Wraith. The Malinois swung his head toward her, all that coiled, terrible energy orienting on the new variable. She stopped walking. She didn't flinch. She lowered herself, not in a lunge, not quickly, one knee at a time onto the hard floor until she was completely on her knees, small and still and below the dog's eye level, her face angled to the right so her gaze fell somewhere harmless. Rhett's free hand instinctively reached for the lead. Wraith gathered himself. 62 pounds of lean muscle and combat conditioning and 11 days of agony shifted forward, teeth pressed against wire. And then Laurel whistled. 3 notes. Low, descending, the last one held for just a half breath. The cadence was specific and unhurried, the kind of pattern that didn't belong to anything a civilian would know. It was the three-note stand-down signal used exclusively in naval special warfare K9 extraction protocols. The sound that meant, mission complete. Threat is over. You're going home now. Wraith stopped. Not slowly, not gradually. He stopped the way a motor stops when someone cuts the power, total and immediate. The growl died in his throat. His ears, pinned flat, rotated forward in one sharp motion. His head canted to the side. And for the first time since he had come through those glass doors, the animal in his eyes receded, just slightly, replaced by something older and deeper, recognition. Rhett made a sound that was not a word. "Don't move," Laurel said, barely above a whisper. She wasn't talking to the dog. She kept her gaze away from Wraith's face, her posture completely passive, and she waited. 3 seconds. 5. The Malinois took one step toward her, then another. He pressed his muzzled nose against her shoulder and exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, and then simply stayed there, trembling. Laurel slowly raised her right hand. She moved it to the lateral strap of the tactical harness, the one that crossed the dog's chest and buckled to the panel above his right shoulder. Her fingers found the quick-release clip. "Don't," Rhett said, and his voice was raw. "He hates having the gear touched." "I know," Laurel said, "but it's the gear that's hurting him." She pressed the release. The buckle opened. She guided the harness strap off his right shoulder and down carefully, and then the whole front panel of the vest loosened, and Laurel eased it to the side, holding the weight so it didn't drop against him. She set it down on the floor with both hands deliberately slow, like she was setting down something irreplaceable. The effect was not gradual. The moment the compression released from his right shoulder, Wraith's legs buckled. Not in a collapse of defeat, but in the involuntary, staggered give of a body that had been bracing against something for so long it had forgotten what it felt like not to brace. He sank forward and sideways, his chin dropping onto Laurel's knee, his whole frame shaking in one long, full-body tremor. And then he made a sound that nobody in that room had expected to ever hear from a combat-trained Malinois. A high, broken, keening whine, thin as a wire, coming from somewhere very deep and very private. He was crying. The reception desk clerk pressed both hands over her mouth. Dr. Bound set the sedation pole against the wall without being aware he was doing it. Rhett Dolan stood with the slack leash dangling from his fist and his face doing something complicated and irreversible. He was a decorated operator with 11 years of service and 3 combat deployments, and he had not cried in front of another human being since he was 19 years old. He dropped to one knee on the linoleum, and he covered his eyes with the back of his wrist, and his shoulders shook once hard. Laurel wrapped one arm carefully around the dog's torso, her other hand moving in slow circles between his shoulder blades, far from the injured joint. She rested her chin against the top of his head. "I know," she said. "I know it hurts, buddy. You've been carrying that all by yourself." Her voice didn't break. "It's going to be okay now." Rhett lowered his wrist. His eyes were red. He stared at his dog, the dog who had guarded a door in the Paktika province while Rhett dragged 2 wounded men to cover. The dog who had been written off as broken and dangerous and unsalvageable, lying across the knees of a woman he had never met before today, finally still. "How?" Rhett said, and the word came out wrong, stripped of its edges. He cleared his throat. "How did you know that signal? That 3-note call? That's a classified extraction protocol." Laurel looked up. Her eyes met Rhett's, and what was in her gaze was not satisfaction or pride. It was something older, a wound that had healed over but left a mark you could still feel if you pressed. "My older sister," she said. "Courseman First Class Dana Caine. She was attached to a Marine K9 unit. She deployed to Kuna Province 4 years ago." Rhett went very still. Her service dog was a Malinois named Scout. Laurel stroked Wraith's ear gently. The dog's eyes were half closed now, the long, ragged breathing finally beginning to even out. When they came home, Scout was exhibiting everything Wraith is showing you today. The aggression, the hyperreactivity, the panic whenever anyone tried to handle him. She paused. Dana spent 3 weeks trying to tell the kennel staff and the base vet that something was physically wrong, that Scout was in pain and nobody was listening to what the pain looked like. She looked back down at the dog. They put Scout down on a Tuesday morning. Dana was at work. They didn't call her first. A beat. A field medic had noted a shoulder contusion from the helicopter extraction in Afghanistan, but that report was filed under the wrong unit designation in the after-action paperwork, and nobody pulled Scout's full record before they made the decision. The room was absolutely silent. 2 months after Scout was euthanized, Laurel continued, Dana went back for her second deployment. She was killed in an IED strike outside Asadabad. She looked at Rhett. Her voice was perfectly steady, the steadiness of someone who had said these words enough times to have worn all the sharp edges off them. I started studying military working dog trauma after I lost her. I wasn't in a position to do anything about it back then. I am now. Rhett stared at her for a long moment. He reached out slowly, his large, scarred hand hovering above Wraith's back, and then set it down gently along the dog's ribs. Wraith didn't tense. He simply exhaled, long and slow, and leaned fractionally into the touch. "I'm sorry about your sister," Rhett said. He said it the way combat veterans said important things, directly and without decoration. "So am I," Laurel said, "every day." Dr. Bown cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was different than it had been, quieter, stripped of the clinical authority. "If she's right about the shoulder, I want to get him into the imaging suite, MRI, not X-ray. Full rotator cuff series." He looked at Laurel. "Will he accept sedation now? Light dose?" Laurel looked at Wraith. "Give his cortisol another 20 minutes to come down, then yes. Light and slow." Bown nodded. He picked up the sedation pole from where he'd leaned it against the wall and carried it back to the dispensary without comment. The automatic doors slid open again. The man who walked through them wore the service dress of a Marine officer, the gold oak leaf of a major on his collar, his posture carrying the particular uprightness of someone who had survived something and decided to carry that survival forward with intention. He was in his late 40s, with a jaw like a squared-off architectural feature and eyes that went immediately to Laurel. Rhett came to attention. "At ease, Chief," the man's voice was low and controlled. "I'm not here for an inspection." He stopped a few feet inside the door. His gaze hadn't left Laurel. "Your name is Caine." Laurel stood up slowly, one hand on Wraith's back as the dog shifted but didn't alarm. "Yes." "Laurel Caine." The officer looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Recognition and grief and something that might have been guilt. Dana's little sister. The sound of her sister's name in this fluorescent-lit waiting room, spoken by a stranger in a Marine uniform, hit her like a step off a curb she hadn't seen coming. "How do you know Dana?" she asked. Major Devon Ashcroft reached under his arm and produced a manila folder that had clearly been carried a long way. It was worn at the corners. He held it out to her. 4 years ago in Kunar province, your sister and Scout ran 200 meters under fire to reach my vehicle after it was disabled by an IED. I was the convoy commander on that operation." He held her gaze. "She applied a tourniquet to my left leg that kept me from bleeding out on the road. Then she held the perimeter, alone, for 18 minutes until the QRF arrived. She was wounded in that engagement. She did not tell the medevac team." Laurel's hands were not entirely steady as she took the folder. The official report listed the engagement as a minor ambush and noted 2 wounded, 1 fatality. It didn't capture what actually happened. Ashcroft's voice tightened slightly, the only sign of what it cost him to say this. The brass was managing a sensitive operational context. Details were compressed. Dana's role was summarized in 2 sentences. "She was cited for a Navy commendation," Laurel said quietly. The paperwork said she performed routine medical support under fire. That citation was written by someone who wasn't there. Ashcroft gestured to the folder in her hands. That is the real after-action account, compiled from the testimony of the 4 men she kept alive that day. Including me, I spent 14 months tracking down statements and requesting declassification. It was finalized 8 weeks ago. Laurel opened the folder. The pages inside were dense with military formatting, some lines still redacted in black, but whole paragraphs ran clear and full. She read the first page. Her vision blurred once, and she blinked it back into focus. "Scout's injury report," she said, turning to the second section. "It's here. Field notes from the helicopter medic. Supraspinatus contusion, right shoulder, noted during extraction. Scout was braced against the door frame when the secondary device detonated. The blast wave hit his right side at roughly 600 kilopascals." Ashcroft paused. That report was filed under my unit designation, not the K9 attachment unit. When Scout came home and started showing signs of aggression, nobody pulled my unit's field records. They only looked at the K9 unit's official logs, which had no injury documentation. "Because it was misfiled," Laurel said. "Because it was misfiled." Ashcroft looked down at Wraith, who was lying quietly now, eyes half shut, breathing measured and slow. "Scout was put down on a Tuesday. I found out 6 months later, when I was still in rehabilitation, and I called the base, and they told me he had been euthanized for severe behavioral deterioration and what the documentation described as irreversible canine PTSD. He was silent for a moment. Scout wasn't irreversible. He was injured and nobody was looking in the right place. The word hung in the clean, antiseptic air of the waiting room. Rhett had gone very still behind Laurel. He was looking at the folder, then at Wraith, and the math of it was clearly moving through him. The 11 days, the yanked leash, the harness compressing that shoulder over and over, the pain he'd had no language for, and therefore expressed the only way he knew how. "I got Wraith's behavioral summary routed to me this morning, through a contact at the kennel." Ashcroft continued. "The symptom profile was identical to what was in Scout's field notes. I drove straight here." He looked at Laurel steadily. "I was 2 minutes from calling this center when I turned off the highway." "I beat you by about 45 minutes, Laurel said. Something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one crossed Ashcroft's face. "You did. And based on what I'm seeing," he glanced toward Wraith, lying calm and loose across the floor. Dana would not be remotely surprised. Laurel closed the folder. She held it against her chest with both arms, and for a moment the clinical efficiency dropped entirely, and she looked exactly like someone who had just been handed back something she had believed was gone forever. Dr. Bown appeared in the doorway to the back corridor. "We're ready in imaging. Caine, I want you in there for the sedation." Laurel looked at Rhett. He was already moving to Wraith's side, one hand resting on the dog's flank, with a gentleness that looked unfamiliar on him, like a skill he was relearning. "He'll be okay," Laurel said, "the light dose, and we'll keep him on his left side. His shoulder isn't going anywhere." Rhett nodded once. He looked like a man who had been carrying something at a dead sprint for 11 days and had just been allowed to set it down. The imaging suite of the Norfolk Center was cool and precisely lit, the MRI machine a wide white cylinder that dominated the back wall. Laurel stood in the observation room alongside Rhett and Major Ashcroft as the sedated Malinois was carefully positioned and the scan began, the images rendered on the monitor in slow, high-resolution slices. Dr. Bown stepped to the screen and leaned forward, his silver pen hovering above the display without touching it. "There," he said, "right there, at the supraspinatus insertion point on the greater tubercle of the humerus." He traced the line of it, a partial tendon tear, frayed at the medial border, surrounded by the bright halo of acute bursitis. The infraspinatus is secondarily inflamed. The axillary nerve runs directly through that tissue. He straightened up. Every time that harness compressed his right shoulder, every lunge, every lead correction, every hard stop, he was receiving a direct nerve strike. Blinding, acute pain, unpredictable and unavoidable. He looked at Laurel, then at Rhett. It is a clinical miracle this dog did not cause a catastrophic injury to one of your handlers. Not because he wanted to, because he was in agony and he had no other language. Rhett was not looking at the monitor. He was looking through the glass at Wraith, lying sedated and still on the MRI table, his flank rising and falling with slow, regular breaths. "Can you fix it?" Rhett said. It wasn't quite a question. Partial supraspinatus tear at this stage is highly treatable without surgery. Bound's voice was certain and warm with professional relief. Platelet-rich plasma injection into the joint, strict rest for 6 weeks, no harness, no lead pressure, no load-bearing work. After that, a shoulder-specific rehabilitation protocol and transition to a chest harness that distributes pull across the sternum instead of the shoulder girdle. He paused. "He'll need time, but he'll heal. That dog is not broken, Chief Dolan. He was never broken." The sound Rhett made was involuntary and brief, the kind a person makes when they've been holding a breath for 11 days and finally stop. He pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment. Then he turned to Laurel, and the look on his face was the look of someone who has had a debt placed on them that they are not sure they have the currency to repay. He put his arms around her and held on. It was sudden and fierce and completely without self-consciousness. Laurel hugged him back, both of them standing in the blue light of the observation room, watching the dog on the other side of the glass breathe steadily for the first time in 11 days. "Thank you," Rhett said, his voice rough. "You gave him back to me." "My sister showed me what to look for," Laurel said. "I just finally had somewhere to look." 6 weeks later, the Norfolk Advanced Veterinary Emergency Center looked nothing like itself on the worst morning of the year. The January light came through the front windows, clean and flat, and the waiting area smelled like coffee from the little machine the front desk clerk had brought in sometime in November. It was a quiet Tuesday. The doors slid open. Rhett Dolan walked in wearing a fleece pullover and running shoes, nothing military about him except the way he moved. Beside him, matching his pace on a long, loose leash, was Wraith. The tactical harness was gone. In its place was a bright red chest harness, padded and fitted along the sternum, the lid attachment point, sitting well clear of the right shoulder. The wire muzzle was gone. His ears were up. His tail moved in easy, unhurried sweeps. He was not scanning the room for threats. He was simply walking in, breathing, existing, without pain. Laurel looked up from the intake computer. Wraith saw her and launched, not in aggression, but in pure ungoverned dog joy, covering the distance between them in 3 strides and burying his face in her stomach with enough force to push her back a step. His tail was moving so hard his entire hindquarters moved with it. "Hey you," she laughed, a real one, short and sudden, and got both hands into the fur behind his ears. "Look at you, just look at you." Rhett stopped beside them, his hands in his pockets, watching his dog with the unhurried satisfaction of someone who had waited a long time for something and found the waiting had been worth it. "He slept through the whole night last Friday," Rhett said. "First time since we got back." "So did you." "So did I." Wraith sat down on Laurel's feet and leaned his entire weight against her shins and sighed with the magnificent, uncomplicated contentment of an animal who had come a very long way back to the beginning of something good.